Hello and welcome to Moneylife. This is Sucheta Dalal. This week we are going to talk about the listing of the National Stock Exchange. If you are an investor, I'm sure you're waiting for this issue. It's going to be one of the biggest in Asia. And you will wonder why it isn't happening. It's been stuck for 10 years. And guess what? People are so upset about it that when last week the Securities and Exchange Board of India imposed a 25 lakh penalty, just 25 lakhs as people thought, on the Bombay Stock Exchange, it set off a little storm on social media. The question was, why would BSE walk away with a token fine for a serious violation, because it sounded serious in the press release, when the National Stock Exchange has faced a barrage of show cause notices from the regulator since 2015, along with an expansive and inconclusive investigation by the Central Bureau of Investigation, the CBI, and the Enforcement Directorate, the ED. This question, of course, goes back to the infamous collocation scam of 2015, which first surfaced when I published a letter by a whistleblower in Moneylife, got sued by the NSE for 100 crores, defamation. All that ended with a victory for us. But basically, the whistleblower had alleged that certain high-frequency traders, who he said colluded with the exchange officials, had privileged access to low-traffic servers, which, when you do high-frequency trading in nano and milliseconds, actually milliseconds, then it can allow someone to profit by just getting access to trading data or hitting the server faster. That's what the collocation scam was all about. Now, a consequence of the investigation that started in 2015, actually it didn't start in 2015, it started well after the case did not go in NSE's favor. That's when SEBI woke up, and a consequence of the investigation was a SEBI order and various appeals filed by NSE, with the result that its IPO application, a draft red herring prospectus filed in 2016, has remained in limbo for nearly 10 years. Meanwhile, the number of investors at the NSE has increased to over 1 lakh under the benign eye of the regulator. So you're not allowing listing, you're allowing more and more people to buy the shares, because people who've been holding on ever since NSE was set up more than 25, 26 years ago in 92, 93, want to get out at various points of time. So trading is happening, SEBI is keeping quiet and looking the other way. Finally, NSE, under humongous pressure, especially from institutional investors to get listed, has come up and said, we don't want to fight anymore. We want to settle all the cases that are pending, and we will pay up whatever SEBI wants us to as the settlement amount. So it's created a corpus of 1400 crore. Now you'll wonder, what is the 1400 crore? If you go back to 2019, SEBI had imposed a 1000 crore penalty on NSE and ordered disgorgement of 650 crore. This went through various appellate levels to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court asked SEBI to return 300 crores. So overall, NSE thinks that this amount is probably adequate. And it is in addition to another 643 crore that NSE has already paid to settle a separate Colo-related case in October 2024. Now, what is happening to the issue? Is it all going to settle? And is there a comparison that BSE was let off easily and NSE is not? Let's examine some facts. For starters, the two cases are completely different. In the NSE Colo scandal, we said SEBI had actually shielded the exchange, did not want to act on the whistleblower letter, which is why he sent it to me, and NSE had flatly denied wrongdoing or that such preferential access was even possible in its most sophisticated systems. It gave interviews to that effect. When a serious investigation was finally initiated by SEBI, SEBI ordered multiple audits, 7 of them, 7 independent audits. All of them disproved NSE's false claims, right? That is what led to the 2019 order. By contrast, BSE issue arose out of a SEBI inspection which covered the period from 2021 to September 22. SEBI found that BSE systems permitted certain employees and paid subscribers to access corporate announcements just before they became public. It also had another issue, which is that BSE failed to penalize brokers who had repeatedly modified client codes. This had created a systemic risk because BSE tended to believe broker certification for compliance. BSE accepted it, corrected it, changed its systems, and the important point here is that SEBI has not been able to establish actual misuse of this early access to announcements or to show that either the BSE or any of these subscribers gained from that access or that it caused a loss to investors in general. Yet, SEBI still penalized BSE 25 lakhs. Why? Because it said you're a first line regulator as a market infrastructure institution, you're a gatekeeper, and you have failed to maintain fairness, transparency, and proper oversight in the dissemination of price sensitive information and the monitoring of broker activities. Excellent. I wish these standards were applied in 2015. BSE, of course, has corrected all this. As you can see, the NSE Colo scam is far bigger. There's no comparison between the two, and several brokers are understood to have made large profits because of early access, which is the number of cases that are going on. And it is no comparison at all between what happened in an inspection and what happened when SEBI tried to help an exchange and the exchange denied absolutely any wrongdoing. Yet, remember, SEBI has held, and its adjudication officer said, as far as the BSE is concerned, that the BSE has a fiduciary duty to the entire ecosystem, which requires that even the possibility of information asymmetry has to be avoided. Now, this is wonderful. Okay, I hope this standard going forward is going to be applied in every case where there is anyone with a fiduciary duty, not just exchanges, which are frontline market infrastructure institutions, but everybody else, mutual funds, brokers who have your demat accounts and what have you. Now, although the NSE scandal was exponentially more damaging, SEBI came across, like I said earlier, as a captured regulator, timid, hesitant, slow to act, had buried the whistleblower letter by getting an explanation from the NSE that there was no wrongdoing, turned a blind eye to blatant failures of governance and appointments and conflict of interest that came out later during the investigation, which led to a complete change in management and eventually a change in the board. In fact, it took 4 years before the NSE came up with its first set of show cause notices in 2019, followed by this order, which also was part of a regulatory overdrive after a weak investigation. The orders were poorly drafted and included gratuitous statements unproven by a whole-time member about the NSE and its officials, which actually damaged SEBI's case in the appellate proceedings. So, as you can see, both episodes reveal one common factor, that SEBI relies on vague, ambiguous statutory provisions to pack up its show cause notices, and it often fails to substantiate its charges in appeal. It has to think about what can be proven, which is what even the police are supposed to do. SEBI doesn't do it. In the BSE matter, SEBI's own adjudication officer dismissed certain charges as vague and unsustainable. In the NSE Colo scandal, it was even worse. It went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ordered SEBI to return 300 crores out of the 625, which was a disgorgement amount, saying that SEBI's order lacked a statutory basis for disgorgement when it was not able to prove unlawful gains by the exchange. Remember, this is on the exchange. Please separate the exchange from the brokers who benefited. Now let's explain what this delay means. It brings us to a peculiar dilemma that SEBI faces. SEBI has not come out very well. Here's an IPO that's kept pending because SEBI's investigation is dragging on for a decade. The CBI and ED are doing their own thing. They never finish fast. And NSE has already won some cases in appeal. So how long can you say that you've appealed to the Supreme Court and keep this NSE issue in limbo, especially when it's likely to be one of the biggest offerings in Asia, and you have large institutional investors, including the original ones who still hold some shares, who need the money because they made a good bet in the 90s. They want to encash on it, right? There's no progress on some of the show cause notices, which is, again, quality of SEBI enforcement. So in this situation, how do you think SEBI is going to structure this NSE settlement? I've asked around and I can see there are two key issues. One, SEBI can withdraw pending appeals in order to facilitate the IPO. This would mean that NSE will enjoy status quo on all the cases that it has won, and it will settle the others which are pending. Still does not explain all questions, and SEBI doesn't answer, SEBI doesn't go public. So the question is, what happens to all the cases against brokers, including one against Ajay Shah, Infotech Financial Services? Will they also be given an option to settle so that we make the whole Colo scam go away, and the fact that SEBI's investigation has not come to a conclusion a decade later? It's an embarrassment. It's an embarrassment globally because NSE is one of the 5 top exchanges in the world. The alternate scenario is that NSE will pay over 1400 crores by telling SEBI, whatever you say, I'm willing to listen. Here's the money. Just make it all go away. Now, a well-known securities lawyer tells me that is indeed a possibility. In fact, he says a settlement proposal can be made to close all issues by accepting and abiding by SEBI orders. The exact details and terms will be kept out of the final order. This we'll come to again. But this settlement would apply to all pending matters, treating SEBI orders as final, regardless of who has prevailed in the interim and appellate cases. Because it's pending, because there are appeals, we'll go by SEBI order, settle it, say we don't want to argue. This is a sad reflection on our justice system. You cannot have scams pending for 10 years. And I'm embarrassed to say the 1992 securities scam, or what is known as a Harshad Mehta scam, still dragging on. There's still a special court. And this may head that way if it is not closed and settled. There was no settlement route at that time. So whatever route SEBI chooses, it is going to be an opaque option with the primary aim of closing this ugly episode in the history of India's largest market infrastructure institution. It does not speak well of SEBI's investigation and enforcement capability. And in the end, what it will show is that SEBI derives its leverage not from great enforcement, supervision, or inspection that it conducts, but from the fact that it is able to hold back an IPO indefinitely. And it's doing this while ignoring active illegal trading that is happening in NSE shares on websites that are openly offering buy-sell quotes and price charts which mimic official secondary market trading. For those of you who don't know and don't understand, you can buy unlisted NSE shares, indirect deals, cash transactions. You cannot trade in unlisted shares. That is why the listing is important. If it was not the case, NSE would not bother to pay such a huge amount of money for official listing. It will be instructive to see what terms of settlement SEBI finally orders. Now, what happens globally is that regulators typically issue detailed settlement orders outlining all that it found wrong with the entity that's being regulated, and it is out there in the open. There's no admission or denial of guilt. A huge amount of money is paid as settlement amount. In India, SEBI has a little alphabet soup of sections, hides most stuff. This is not correct. This is the Indianized way of misusing settlement processes. But neither the Finance Ministry nor the Joint Parliamentary Committee that has oversight on SEBI has ever bothered to ask questions. So this has continued. SEBI officials now are fully aware that whatever they do, whatever they bury, there is a problem. But there is enormous pressure to approve NSE's IPO and listing because it's expected to unlock valuation exceeding $20 billion and a market capitalization that may be in trillions. It will create a major new stock for institutional investors at a time when demand for Indian stocks is very high among global institutional investors and Indian institutional investors. There's another profound irony to all of this. NSE at one time did not want to list. It used its privileged position to block BSE and MCX's listing to avoid pressure on itself. This was in 2009-10. So SEBI influenced by NSE, set up the Bimal Jalan Committee, which came up with recommendations that had draconian restrictions on listed exchanges, including a cap on profit distribution and income from listing. This would have meant that listing would have been pointless. All this changed over time when other global exchanges in Singapore and Australia got listed, and NSE's public sector promoters went through a financial crunch and needed money. So there was pressure on NSE to find a way to allow them to encash, which is by listing. So instead of listing, they allowed a sale of shares to foreign institutional investors at huge valuations. NSE, remember, is an extraordinarily profitable company, probably the most profitable in India. It's a near monopoly, and institutions including ICICI, Stockholding Corporation, IDBI, which were in a dire state, managed to sell to FIIs. Now, these FIIs came in, but they wanted listing. So the pressure is going on from 2010 that eventually NSE should be listed. In order to facilitate this, SEBI coolly did an about turn, forgot about Bimal Jalan Committee's more draconian restrictions, allowed BSE and MCX to list. Then happened the Colo scam. So another 10 years have gone by. Time flies, 10 years, decades just vanish. And during this time, SEBI has allowed 1 lakh investors to hold shares and has turned a blind eye to unregulated trading, as I said earlier. So, should they do this settlement at all? To my mind, yes. On paper, the proposed settlement looks like an elegant resolution to the whole problem. SEBI can claim a record payout because nobody has paid this kind of money in a settlement. NSE can close the issue, shed all the regulatory baggage, stop paying huge legal fees, and tap public markets. If there's one unifying dark theme to this saga, it is the danger of regulatory inconsistency all around. SEBI, which used the Jalan Committee to block BSE's listing, is now looking to close a huge scandal with the settlement, primarily to enable NSE's listing. This hides a failure to bring investigations to a proper close with a penalty. Settlement is not a penalty, and 10 years is a long time. NSE is a first-line regulator which lobbied hard to prevent listing under a different management. It's now paying a record amount to close this. I'm repeating things, but it shows you how things change. There's an about turn. It will be the largest listing in Asia. NSE will remain extraordinarily profitable. It continues to dominate and have a near monopoly in the derivatives market especially. This has its own issues. It needs SEBI to be on its toes and alert, cannot ever become a captive regulator again. So in the end, the story of NSE's IPO is not simply about one exchange's quest for capital. In fact, it doesn't need the capital. It doesn't need listing. The country needs it. This is a cautionary tale about what happens when a regulator mistakes opacity for prudence and expediency for regulation, when a regulator is so overawed by a regulated entity that it fails to act in time and creates a decade-long problem. So no settlement, however large, can redeem a decade of drift. We can only hope that this sort of episode is never repeated again. We've had other problems in SEBI, so it's not that SEBI is out of the woods. We need the new chairman to look at this more carefully because it's an institution's reputation, a regulator's reputation at stake. If you agree, do subscribe and share. Thank you.